Good evening, everyone.
How are you?
Oh, Hashem, thank you. So last time we did Gimel, we're going to do Daled. So it says over here in the Torah, Nochri en mizamin alav b'afilu ger shemal velo tabal. Oh, look what it says, right? That a goy, we cannot do zimun with a goy, of course. He doesn't count in the zimun. So then he talks about something interesting. He says also a convert, right? That he did circumcision, but he didn't go into mikveh yet. Right, so the rule is like this, if a ger he's circumcised, but he didn't go into mikveh, he's still a goy. Right? So that's why, we cannot do zimun with him. So only when he goes to mikveh, then he can do zimun. That's the idea. So regarding this, it says with Yosef, he brings the source, Pashut beperek shlosha shachlu. Where is this? Also in the Gemara there, in Brachot, and it's funny. I was walking the street. Somebody met me, some Jew, met up with me. He says, Rabbi, he says, he says, how do the ladies do, conversion, like they have nothing to cut. I said, well, they don't cut, they just go into the mikveh. There's nothing to cut. Some people don't realize these things. So when we say it, right?
Only the nails, Rabbi.
I'm
No,
sorry.
the nails. He's talking about the nails.
No. What can I tell you? Okay. So anyway, right, yeah, so obviously this only applies to a male convert, right? Because the female convert, we don't cut nothing, just she goes into the mikveh, that's it, right? Okay. Yeah, so let's go. There's more here, but Yosef, something more. So here it brings, right, Rabbeinu Tam lo היה מניח אפילו לגר, גמור לברך ברכת המזון. Okay, this is very interesting. So what is he saying over here? Let me look inside the Torah. Mm. Right, so here's another thing, right? He says he brings here the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, right? So the problem is, right? He says also with a gear, there's another problem, that there's something in the Birkat Hamazon which doesn't apply to them, right? Why? So it says, "Ashein chalta lavotenu," right? So what does that mean? That our forefathers inherited the land of Israel, right? V'tanya besifri asher nishbata lavotenu perat legerim le'avadim meshucharim. וכך כתב בהאג ברי, כתב שיכול לברך, שיכול לומר לאבותינו, דכתיב אב המון גויים, נתתיך בדרשינן, מתחילת אב לארם, מכאן ואילך לכל העולם. So right, so in other words, there seems to be a machloket here. So what's the machloket? Whether the ger can lead the Birkat Hamazon or not, right? So according to Rabbeinu Tam and the Bahag, apparently there's a problem with this because something they say in the Birkat Hamazon doesn't apply to them. What does that mean? It doesn't apply to them when they say, regarding the land of Israel, right? They inherited that because they obviously they weren't there at that time to inherit the land. They converted later on, right? Whatever. Everyone converted according to his respective time. But the halacha is not like that, right? He says that on the other side, that we have the Ri and the Baha. The Ri, yeah, says that they can lead the Birkat Hamazon. Uh, so that's interesting. So let's look at the Beit Yosef regarding that and see what he says there. So he says, זה פשוט, תקאי למען שכתב נוכרי, אין מזמין עליו, אפילו גר שמל ולא טבל. מה שכתב רבנו בשם רבנו תם, שלא תהיה right. So it says regarding this, the Beit Yosef, הכל בתוספות, it's all brought down תוספות, this thing. פרק המוכר את הספינה, right, this באת, פי א' עמוד א', גמרא, הקונה שני אילנות שבתוך של חברו, וכן כתב בהגות מימון, פרק ח' מלכות עם תפילה, וברוקח, כתב הגור, רבנו תם לא היה מניח, right? So רבנו תם apparently, right, he wasn't allowing the converts to do Birkat Hamazon. What does that mean to lead the Birkat Hamazon? They should fulfill the obligation of others. In other words, he agrees that they're obligated to do Birkat Hamazon, but not to fulfill the obligation of others. Also it's written like this in Tosfot Rabbeinu Tam, לא היה מניח לגר. Okay. לברך ברכת המזון, הזימון, right, they weren't allowing them to do זימון, ונראה שהטעם משום כשמברך לעצמו יחסר מהברכות אותן תיבות. So he says the thing is like this, when they're blessing themselves, they're going to leave out those words, אבל כשמברך לאחרים, when you're blessing for others, אם לא יאמר אותם, if you wouldn't say them, תיבות נמצא לגבי דידהו משנה מתפעד שתבוא חכמים. So you're changing the format, right, for them, because they're required to say those things. ברכות. ונראה דעים אחר שענו ברכת הזימון ברך כל אחד ברכת המזון לעצמו, so he says it seems like if everybody did ברכת המזון by himself, after the זימון, שפיר דמה, they will be okay, ואפילו לרבנו תם, even according to רבנו תם, ולא בא למעט אלא היכא שאין יוצאים בברכת המזון. So it's only coming to exclude when they're, right, fulfilling the ברכת המזון, שאומר הגר ונראה שלזה נתכוון, in other words, the others are being fulfilling obligation from them. נתכוון הגור במה שכתב, רצה לומר, להוציא אחרים, כבר כתבתי בסימן נ"ג, שדעת הרמב"ן והרמב"ם, so he says, I already wrote, right, in chapter 53, that the Ramban and the Rambam, ורשב"א ור"ן, zal kedat ri be'achi naktina, right? So he says they paskin like the ri. So in other words, the halacha is not like that opinion, Rabbeinu Tam, So therefore, the convert is allowed to lead the Birkat Hamazon, even that, right? And fulfill the obligation of others as well. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch, what he says there. Okay. Yeah, so it says over here like the Shulchan Aruch. Oved kochavim en mezamin alav. As we said, right, you cannot do zimun with a goy. But afilu ger shemal velo tabal. Also, right, ger, who, right, he circumcised, but he didn't go into mikveh yet. En mezamin alav. So we cannot do zimun with on him, right? So as we said, right, because he's a goy still, until he goes into the mikveh. Aval ger gamur mezamin alav. So it says, but if he's if he's already finished the process, right? So then we can do zimun with him, no problem. He can also say, right, Birkat Hamazon and say, Al shein chalta l'avotenu, he gave to our fathers the land, right? So question is, right, how does that fit in for a ger to say, that he gave us the land, right? So the answer is that he answers in Bet Yosef that what are we saying, right? That you give it to our forefathers, right? And so, they're all Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak, Yaakov. They're also the forefathers of the converts. You understand? So therefore, they are considered to be their forefathers. But that's why we write for a ger, right? That he's Bat Avram Avinu, right? Or Ben Avram Avinu, right? Because he comes from Abraham, and that's the whole thing, right? So therefore, there is no misnomer there when you make this declaration in Birkat Hamazon. So we don't pass like Rabbi Tam, as we said. We go like the Ri and the Rambam and the Rashba and the Ran, whatever it was. Okay, so that's that. So let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. So it says in Vav, Nashim va'avadim ktanim en mazanim lahem, right? Also, we don't do zimun with who? With women and with slaves and with children, right? Mishnah pek shlosha she'achlu, right? So, but this has a whole discussion here that has to be explained, right? Because sometimes women can do it, actually, so we'll see how that works, right? But in general, right, what he's trying to say is like this, that if the men are doing it, so then we shouldn't bring the women also into it. But we're going to discuss this whole thing, right? It's a little bit complicated, whatever. I mean, has some details, whatever. It's not so complicated, but anyway, right? So it says over here in the Bit Yosef, Mishnah be'perek shlosha shachru, right? It's a Mishnah there, Mem He Amud Aleph, in Brachot, and Tamar Banan Nashim Mezamnot Le'atzman. Right. So here's the thing, right? Now comes the Braita and tells you that women can make zimun by themselves. So meaning what? If you have three ladies, who are eating a meal together, so they should make zimun. That's the thing, right? So let me see in the tour inside what he says regarding this. Yeah, but I think that's one. Also, the slaves, right, as well. If they're doing it just by themselves, they can also do zimun, right? So nashim ve'avadim ktanim im ratzu lezamen en mezamin. Right. So he says, but if you have a group like together, women and slaves and children, so then they shouldn't do zimun together. Mashma de nashim mezamot tatzman. So it implies, right, that women can do zimun by themselves, v'chayavot lasot, and they're obligated to do so. Ashkenaz lo nahagu, but he says in Ashkenaz, in Germany, they're not accustomed to do like that. He says, v'yesh mefarshim kedei lekayim minhag, and some say, right, to uphold the custom, hadikamar nashim mezamot tatzman, that which we said, right, that the women do zimun by themselves, perush im ratzu, if they want. But there is no obligation, according to that opinion. Rashi, that's what Rashi says also. But he says the Rosh says the Al Kocha Chayavot Kamar. He says no, they're actually obligated. He says at the Tanya Bi'arachin, because it says in Arachin Gimel Aref Masechet Arachin. Akol Chayavim Zimun. Right, everybody's obligated in zimun. But kamar hakol le'tu emai. So what does that mean? To include what? Mai le'tu nashim is coming to include women. Ve'ainu al korchach ve'chiyuvam. So that means that they're obligated to do so. The kamar hakol chayavin. So there you go. Right. So according to Rosh, women are actually obligated to do zimun. So let's see the Bit Yosef here. So it says here, Nashim v'abadim ktanim en mezamin lahem, right? Tanu Banan. So he brings a source over here for this thing, right? Sham berosh perek mem he amud aleph. מפרש בגמרא טעמה דנשים ועבדים אם רצו לזמן אין מזמנים משום פריצות טעה. So he says, here's the problem, right? What the rabbis didn't want is that these three groups, should be doing zimun together. Women and slaves and children. Why? Because of peritzuta. So meaning what? That this might lead to promiscuity. And that's what they were afraid of. Rashi, mishum peritzuta ben the nashim ben, right, ben the Mishkav Zachur Levadim Katanim. Right. So then, okay, so women, you can understand, right, what the promiscuity would be, but what promiscuity would be with slaves and children, right? So it says it may lead to homosexual activity. So therefore, this is the reason why they forbade that. So yeah, this was Rashi. So therefore, what they didn't want, right, is that these three groups should do zimun together. This is not a good thing. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So it says like this, right? Nashim v'avadim ktanim, as we said, right? Women and slaves and children, en lazim lalem, we don't do zimun together with them, right? Aval mezamin el atzman, but they do zimun for themselves. Right? ולא תהא חבורה של נשים ועבדים קטנים מזמין יחד. So what we don't want, as we said, right, is that all these three groups together, doing zimun. Mishum peritzuta de'avadim, because so who's the culprit over here? Who's the one who makes the problems? It's the slaves, right? Because they're promiscuous in general. You know what I mean? These are slaves. So because of that, we don't want them hanging around with the ladies, and hanging around with the kids. אלא נשים לעצמן ובנים לעצמן, but שלא יזמנו בהשם. Right? So he says, right, that they can do each one by themselves, right? The women, the slaves, but he says they shouldn't do with the name of God, right? This we didn't see in the Bit Yosef, so that's very interesting. You see about that. Right, so it is in the Torah, that language. Okay. So they shouldn't do with the name of God. So the question is why? I don't know what the purpose of that is. So let's see what he says in the Mishnah Berurah here. Right, so Mishnah Berurah explains it good. You know what it says? That when it comes to mentioning the name of God, right, this requires 10 men, like a minyan, basically. And this is the reason why, you can't do it with the women and the slaves. But they can do zimun. That's what he's saying, right? So they're not considered to be a minyan, basically. That's what he's saying. Okay.
Rabbi, can you explain that? So slaves, children, and women cannot be together, right?
Right. They shouldn't do
Because
zimun together.
and so why are they talking about minyan now? Is it because together will make 10
No,
or
we said, right, that they can do each one separately. They can do zimun, each group separately. Uh,
okay.
but the thing is, don't mention the name of God with just 10 people.
Oh,
So
because it will become a minyan with
because that's not
several.
a minyan, right? Without men, there's no minyan there.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. So the question is like this now, right? What about if there are men? So can the women join in the zimun with the men?
Yes, because they're not slaves. They're
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. That's what it sounds like to me. That there's no problem with that. They can participate in the zimun with the men. And also, same thing would apply with the children and women, right? No problem there.
What about Kalisha?
Ah, oh. So, yeah, that's a good question, but there is an answer to that. I have to explain to a couple of things about that. First of all, Zimun doesn't really require singing. That's one thing. I mean, you don't have to sing. Oh, you just answer. That's one thing, right? Uh, but there's also another issue, which is, we already. I don't know if you guys remember me saying this, but there's an interesting lesson which is learned out of reading the Torah, right? Which is that, the Chazal said in the Talmud, are women supposed to read the Torah or not, right? To go up to read the Torah. So the truth is, they were supposed to go up and read the Torah. There was no problem with that. But the reason why the rabbis forbade it is because, not to embarrass the men. Why? Because in other words, the women can read and the women don't have to read. So in order not to embarrass the men, that's why they said the women shouldn't go up. Right? But then, right, the question comes up, what about Kol Isha, right? Why didn't they decree? Because of the voice of the woman. So the answer is, right, that when they're reading the Torah, we're not concerned about that. We're only concerned about, if they're singing, some mundane stuff. But when you're reading the Torah, even if you're singing, there's no chashash, there's no concern. In other words, Divrei Torah, there's no Yetzer Hara there. So that's the reason. So same thing, apparently would apply here as well. Since we're doing here, right, blessings, so the concept of Yetzer Hara will not apply here. So because of that, we're not really concerned about Kol Isha. So there's no problem with that. Okay, something like that. So let's move on. I think I skipped one that came before this. So I'm gonna go back and do that one. Hey, right? I think I skipped hey. So I'll go back to that. Here it is, right? So it says in hey, וכן העונן בכל שהוא פטור מלברך אין מזמין עליו. Oh, so it says, right, that onen, right, in the right on the weekdays, he cannot be included in the zimun. Onen. Right, so you guys remember what's onen? One time we learned this. So onen is a mourner that the dead wasn't buried yet. Right? He's, like the preliminary stage of mourning, which is called onen. So, right, the rule is with onen that he's patur from the mitzvot, he's absolved from the mitzvot. So therefore, he doesn't really have to say after Birkat Hamazon. He's not obligated to say Birkat Hamazon. And therefore, right, automatically it follows that he cannot say zimun because he's not obligated. He's absolved. So how long does that go? Until the dead is buried, right? And then he's not onen anymore. There are all kinds of rules about that. I'm not going to get into all the details now, but anyway, that's the basic idea, right? Okay.
I'm sorry. So a person that is on them that is doing that, they're exempt? Is that
They're exempt from all the mitzvot.
all the mitzvot? Okay.
All the mitzvot, yes. Except the negative commandments, right? That's not, that you always have to keep, no matter what. Right, okay. Right,
Thank you.
Yeah, the positive commandments, they don't have to keep them. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, right. So that's interesting. Um, you know, I want to tell you guys, that one thing you should know, right? It's good to know, and it's important that, the question is like this, right? Are converts obligated to mourn for their dead, their old relatives, from the old days?
No,
They're not, right? You know that, right? They're not obligated to mourn. So, I mean, what can I do? What can I tell you, right? It is what it is. Uh, so we were talking about this in the Gemara a little bit, this issue. Uh, when we were learning Daf Yomi, right, in Sanhedrin, it talks over there about somebody who was executed by the Beddin, for some kind of a crime that he did. So, it says over there that the relatives don't mourn for them, because after all, they were sinners, these people, right? So we don't mourn for sinners like that. Um, so, there was a good question asked there, right? Which is that, how can a person really refrain from mourning, like after all, right? It's an emotional thing, right? You're very attached to your relative, whatever. So how can you refrain? So, the answer is
I thought that it's not that you can't be sad, it's that you don't have to go through the formal mourning process.
yeah, I think that you hit it right on this. You nailed it, right? The answer is that it says there that you're allowed to grieve for them, but not mourn. You understand? So grieving is in the heart, that you can do, no problem. If it hurts you, you feel pain, right? You feel the loss. Nothing wrong with that. You can grieve about that. But we don't do the actual, mourning ceremonies. That's what we're talking about. That we don't do, right? Like, ripping the clothes, tearing, things like this, right? And all that other stuff, right? That the mourners do. There's a lot of stuff that they do.
But the ger would still, or the convert would still mourn the loss of a spouse, yeah.
If it's a Jewish spouse, yeah, of course, yeah, Jewish spouse, yeah,
Obviously.
right, obviously, yeah, but
Married to somebody who wasn't Jewish.
these days, nothing's so obvious anymore. The lines have been crossed, so we have to state everything specifically, we have to say it out loud, right? Whatever. So you never know. God knows whatever. People have misunderstandings about these things. If you don't spell it out for them. Okay, so that's the story, right? So yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, obviously, right? Yeah. And also, I mean, the convert can have children as well. Hopefully, right? They won't see anything bad from the children. But it could happen. You never know. Hashem shouldn't let us see things like that. Okay, great. So let's do Shulchan Aruch. Truth is, in Yalkut Yosef, he writes, this is the one that I translated, whatever, 15 years ago. He writes there that, even though you're not obligated to mourn for your parent, in other words, if you're a ger, but you're allowed to say Kaddish, if you want to, for them, you can say Kaddish for them. Obviously, that only applies to the man, right? But,
Rabbi, I have a question. For the convert, if they have a miscarriage, is the fetus considered a Jew?
just like any other Jew, yeah, it's all the same.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
It's not considered a living soul until it's 30 days old.
Yeah, there's all kinds of rules about that. What we do for them. Right? You're right. You're right. You're right. There's all kinds of details about that. What we do exactly, what we don't do. I don't remember all the details right now. I can't tell you everything, but hopefully you won't have to see from it, right? But there is a chapter on that in the Shulchan Aruch. Talks about those things. Okay, so that's that. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. See what's there. So it says, right, that onen bechol, as we said, right, onen, right, and on the weekday, right, he's absolved, right. So therefore, we don't do zimun with him, obviously. Right? He's absolved. Um, so he says only weekdays, right? Why? Because on Shabbat that's different, right? You understand why that is? Because we don't mourn on Shabbat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So therefore, it's something else. So on Shabbat you could do zimun with him. Okay. All right. Yeah. But the interesting thing is, that on Shabbat the rule is that we don't do like outward mourning, but things which are hidden we do. Things that people don't see, that we do. So there is a differentiation with those things. So this would consider to be outward, since people see, right? You're doing zimun, you're not doing zimun, it's outward. So therefore, we don't do that. Okay, great. So let's go to Zain. Right, now we're going to talk about this issue with the women. Zimun with the women. Right, to talk more about that. Now we're going to talk about the issue, what they do when they're by themselves. No slaves there, right? No. Okay. Uh, so it says with Yosef regarding that, King Katu Sham Tosod, right? That's what's in Tosod Rosh. Right? As we said, right, that the Rosh considers it to be an obligation for women. Right, so Tosfot says it's optional, some rabbis there, and Rosh says it's no, it's obligation for women. Because he has a Gemara in the Arachin. Gimel Amud Aleph, Hakol Chayvim Zimun, B'chen Yichya Rabbeinu Yonah. So Rabbeinu Yonah also seems to go like the Rosh. Gam Ken Shehen Chayavot B'Zimun, that they're obligated to do Zimun. There you go. וסמ"ג כתב גרסינן בפרק כמה דערכין, so it says there, right, that הכל חייבים בזימון, everybody's obligated to do זימון, same thing, right? לעיתוי הנשים, even to include women. תניא נשים מזמנות לעצמן, because it says, right, the women can do זימון by themselves. ותמה בריש פרק שלושה שאכלו, מסיק לנשים מזמנות לעצמן. Right, it says over there that women do zimun for themselves, reshut, but there it says, right, that it's only optional. The Braita. V'omer ri deleatzman dafka reshut. So it's only optional when they're by themselves. V'kasheochlot im anashim chayavot. Oh, so he says if they're eating with a man, they're obligated. Wow. V'yotzot bezimun shelanu v'non mivarchot leatzman. Oh, all right. So he says they can do it with us together. Right. They don't have to do it by themselves. Like a separate group. We're not. They're not obligated to do that. Okay, that's interesting. So then he says, right? So he says, Rav Yonah Kohen haya moreh halacha lemaseh litzaref isha lezimun. Right. So this rabbi was saying that the women should combine with the zimun, with the men. Ken katav Shem Mordechai Tzos and Mordechai v'Shem Rabbeinu Simcha. Name of this rabbi. V'katav agur shelo ra'a v'lo shama me'olam. So says this rabbi, right, I never saw anybody like this doing this, Makom shenohagin bo ken, that the women do it, with the men. He says, I never saw that. Right? The truth is, it's true. You don't really see this very often, the women participating in the zimun. So let's see. Mash katav Rabbeinu b'shem Rambam. And now what you said the name of the Rambam, right? Let's see what he says there in the Torah. Very interesting. נשים ועבדים הקטנים אין מזמין עליהם, אבל מזמין על עצמם. לא תהיה לבחורה של נשים ועבדים קטנים, יחד ולעד נשים לעצמם ועבדים קטנים לעצמם, ובן שלנו וזהו. Right, so yeah, okay, we read this Rambam already. So let's go to Bet Yosef again. let's return to that. So it says Bet Yosef regarding this, regarding what the Rambam said. Ha b'Perek K, right? So it says in Perek K, right? That's brought down this Rambam. Mishnah. So it's even though he's really basically saying the same thing as the Mishnah, and the Braita, that Tur wrote, right? He still wanted to write the words of the Rambam, right? Even though it's a ditto, basically, right? It's a copy over. So he wanted to learn from the Rambam that the women should not use the name of God, right? Right? So then he wanted to also talk about the issue of right, the androgynos, right, and the tumtum, right? That these are the ones whose gender is not clear, right? Right, the hermaphrodite and tumtum is the one whose genitals are covered, can't see it. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a second, but so why don't they write women do with the name of God? So same thing as the Mishnah Berurah said, right? That you need a minyan for this, right? Of men. Because it's called davar shebekdusha. It's like, right, kedusha, it's holiness, whatever. That needs a minyan of men. Gdolim, it has to be right, grown-up men. Right? And so, in other words, not children and not slaves. Okay, that's that. So let's see the.
Rabbi, a little confused. So if it was only men, 3 men, can they say a man? No, right? For the simun? For the simun, can they say a man?
Oh, you're asking about the women, right?
No, the men.
So yeah, 3 men do zimun, but you need 10 of them to do Shem Hashem, right? The name of God.
So okay.
Right. So all right. So you need a minyan, basically. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So it says Nashim mezamnot le'atzman reshut, right? So he paskins that for women, right, to do zimun, it's not obligation. It's right. It's optional if they want to. So can't tell you. It is what it is. So he didn't pass like the Rosh, who said there was obligation. Interesting. So he says, right, that about כשאוכלות עם הנשים, what about if they eat with the men? חייבות ויוצאות בזימון שלנו. Right, so then he says, right, they're obligated in that case, right, but they fulfill their obligation with our zimun, right? So that can be interpreted two ways, Does that mean that they just listen, or does that mean they also say it? So let's see how the Mishnah Berurah explains this, right? Right. So Mishnah Berurah explains it like the original way we understood it, right? Which is that they do answer, with the men. They're obligated actually here. So in other words, when they're by themselves, it's optional. If they want to, they could. But when they're with the men, they're obligated to do so. So what they do is they answer, together with the men. That's what he says. So here's the interesting thing, right? He brings up here an interesting point, the Mishnah Berurah. That let's say you have 2 men, right, and 1 woman. Do they do zimun? So there, they don't really do it, That's the thing. Only when there's three men and one woman or more, they can do zimun together. But not two men and one woman. So in other words, the women are not a part of the original, the basic right formation here. I mean, they're just additional. So therefore, what do you call it? It should be three men at least. And then if there's women also, they answer also. But if there's two men and one woman, they don't do zimun.
You know what I'm going to ask.
Sure, go ahead.
What if there's three women doing it and there's a man?
Oh, that's a good question. Excellent question. Yeah. So, so definitely there, right? As we said, it's optional, for the women. That's what it would be.
But the man would not be obligated?
The man, you need three men, right? So you don't have three men. So the man is out of the picture. He's out of the picture there. So basically, it's the women, right, who have the option to do zimun, and obviously, he could answer with them. Why not, right? Nothing wrong with that. But he's not obligated. So in other words, when you have three women and one man, right, there's no obligation for anybody. But if they want to, they could. That's pretty much what it comes out to be.
Overpowered. No, it's kidding.
I'm sorry?
Overpowered by women.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay, I got you. I got you. All right, there you go. So that's the story there. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, all these details about the laws of Zimun, interesting stuff. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Um, okay, now we're getting to the other genders, right? The other genders besides men and women. Okay. Let's see what we can find over here. Okay. See what we got. So it says over here in the Turim, right? Het and tet. ומש כתב אנדרוגינוס מזמן דמינו ובינו מזמן שלא נשים, לא נשים וטומטום אינו מזמן כלל. So he says, right, what about the hermaphrodites, right? We call that androgynos, androgyne, whatever, right? Whatever they call that. So, this is like, they have both male and female, right, genitals, these people, right? It's like a very rare mutation, that occurs. Like, once in a blue moon, whatever. I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but they're very rare actually. But they're still born all the time. So what about these guys, girls, whatever they are, right? Whatever they may be. So anyway, right, what's with them? So it says like this, right, that if they have like, three hermaphrodites, they can do zimun together. And but not with men and not with women, right? Again, I guess we're here afraid of pritzut, right, of promiscuity, whatever. But tumtum eno mezamen klal, and tumtum, right? Who's tumtum? We don't know if he's a male or female. We haven't seen his genitals, so we don't know what he is, right? And therefore, he shouldn't do it all. Why? Because we're not sure which group he belongs to, right? So it's going to be it could be a problem. That's what the Torah says. So brings the Bet Yosef, right? The source for this, Hachitanya Pek Ra'u Beddin, right? Where is this in Rosh Hashanah, Kaftet Amud Aleph? Rinyan Tekiyat Shofar. So there it's talking about the shofar, right? The Tama Mishon the Androgynos Have Bria Bifnei Atzma. Look what he says, right? So this androgyne, right? This right hermaphrodite, it's like basically a third gender, some kind of that's what he's saying here. Hilkach Lemino. So therefore, they can only do with their own gender, right? Which is the hermaphrodites. מי המזמן? וטעם הטומטום שלא מזמן אפילו אם מינו משום דאיקה למך שמא ימצא זה Zachar halal nekevot. So as we said, right, when it comes to the tumtum, we don't know what he is. So there, right, could be that he's a woman, he's a man, he's a man. We don't know what he is. So that's why we can't do it. Right? You get a surprise over here. It could be a surprise. And that which we said, right, that we don't do zimun together with the slaves and the women and the children. Katav Rabbeinu Yonah, says Rabbeinu Yonah, B'Shem Rashi, Rashi, the Nashim and Mistarfot lezimun. So he says, right, that women don't combine for zimun. Afilu im ba'alehen mipnei, even with their husbands. Mipnei she'en lechavuratan, right. So here he's talking about שאף על פי שיש שלושה אנשים, אין נשים מצטרפות עמהן לזימון, אבל לר"ן כתב, right, so according to this opinion, right, women cannot do zimun with the men, but we already said, right, we don't paskin like this. Interesting. So אין נשים מצטרפות עמהן לזימון, אבל לר"ן כתב, but the Ran says the opposite, right, the מגילה, גם להעיד אצלן, הכל כשהם לקרוא את המגילה, חוץ מכלל שוט וקטן, זה משמע שאנשים מוציאות את עצמם, נשים ידי חובה מגילה. So over there, right, it talks about the issue of Megillah. The women can fulfill each other's opinion, obligation for the Megillah. So what does that mean? The men can fulfill the women can fulfill the obligation of the men. ויש אומרים שאף על פי שהן מוציאות אינן מצטרפות למניין 10. But some say, right, that even though they do fulfill obligation, but they don't combine to a minion of 10, למען דמצריך 10 במגילה. According to one who obligates, right, to have 10 people in the Megillah. כדאי שככן בעניין ברכת המזון, like we said in ברכת המזון. ושאף על פי שנשים מזמנות לעצמן, even though women can do zimun by themselves, אפילו הכי אינם, but nevertheless, right, אינם מצטרפות לזמן עם אנשים משום פריצותא. They cannot do combine with פריצות. ואי אפשר דהתם הוא שאינן מוציאות אנשים כקטן, אבל כאן דהיח אפשר שמוציאות אנשים ידי קריאתן, קריאה ואין מצטרפים מהן למניין. So he doesn't agree with this, right? He says it cannot be like that, because just like they combine when it comes to Megillah, they're all same thing with the Zimun. But then מצטרפות. וכי תמה אמי לא חיישינן אחא פריצותא. So if you're going to ask me, why are we concerned about here, right, the promiscuity? כי איך היא דחיישינן התם, like the words concerned about over there. אפשר לומר דשני אחא, this is different here. Why? זה על ידי צירוף. Ika shinui b'matbea becha, because when you combine, right, together, you're changing the format of the blessing. Ika zimun dehave shinui matbea birkat hamazon, because there is zimun which is changing the format of the birkat hamazon. V'chon shenikrat tzirufan. So therefore, since they're right combination, right, is recognizable, im anashim with the men, ika lamechash lepritzuta. So then we're concerned about pritzut. Oh wow. But when it comes to Megillah and tzirufan nekar, their participation is not recognizable. Because right when it comes to reading, in the public sphere, since they're not really recognizable, mutar, it's allowed. Same thing with Birkat Hamazon. So as we said, right, when you have 3 men besides the women, then they do combine, right? Even the women with them. Because then their participation is not recognizable. So that's exactly how we said, right? That's how we paskined, already. We already said, right, that I added this on my own volition, but now, right, we see it's in the Bet Yosef also, which is right that because we saw in the Mishnah Berurah, that's why. So the rule is again, right, to reiterate that 2 men and 1 woman don't combine, because then it becomes recognizable already, and there's more concern about pritzuta, about promiscuity. But 3 men and 1 woman do combine, right, or more, right, or even more women, right? As long as you have a base of 3 men, basically, right, that's what you need. Once you got that base, you can add more women, no problem. וגם הראש כתב בתשובה, the Rosh also says in תשובה, ונשים יוצאות בזימון של הנשים, that they can do zimun with the men, right? כיוון שמסובין יחד, and they're sitting together, right? the נשים מזמנות לעצמן, כל שכן שיוצאות בזימון של הנשים. All the more so, right, when they do zimun with the men, they can do it themselves as well. וכן כתב סמ"ג, that's what it says in סמ"ג בשם ברי, name of the read. כתבתי בסמ"ג. Okay, so that's it, right? Okay, so that's Chet and Tet. So we'll do Shulchan Aruch, we'll stop there. Okay, there's more in this chapter. We're not done with the chapter yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there. So let's see, right? So it says over here in the Shulchan Aruch, androgynos, right? Mezamen limino, mezamen dolot nashim v'lo nashim. So as we said, right, the androgynos, right, hermaphrodite does combine with their own type, but not with the men and the women, right? So we already said that's because of promiscuity, right? So same thing applies here as well. Okay, so the halacha is, by the way, with these hermaphrodites, are they allowed to get married? That's the question, right? So the rule is they're allowed to marry a woman, not a man, right? They can marry a woman. That's the way the Rambam paskins. They can get married if they want to. Okay, so let's go to the next one, right? Tumtum enam mizamim chalal. But tumtum, as we said, right, doesn't do zimun at all. The problem is we don't know his gender, right? This is the problem. So it could be he's combining with women, he's combining with women. It could be something, a combination which is not allowed, as we said, right? So therefore, right, this is the reason why we avoid that. Today, by the way, I have to tell you that there's no tum today. In other words, they can always do surgery, and see what gender he has. They can do ultrasound. God, they have everything today. Today they can do everything. So there's no question marks anymore today. Whatever. They can even see what gender your baby is in your stomach. All the more so they can see these guys. I mean, so there's no problem today. In the old days, there was this issue. That's the thing. Okay, great. So I guess we'll stop there. Thank you for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Laila Tov Chazak Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow, Bezat Hashem. And have a great one. All the best. God bless.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
All the best.